Hello, welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war, where in this one we have a significant advance by the Russians here to the north of Avdiivka. The Russians have managed to advance through all of the Dacha area here to the north of Avdiivka and have now gotten a foothold within the residential area of the city itself. This is seen by this geolocated footage, which shows Russian positions here in the northern outskirts of the residential area of Avdiivka getting hit by Ukrainian FPV drones in a video they have released. Based on this footage, we can see that the Russians now have positions within the residential area of Avdiivka to the north, and with this in combination to the south, they are now inside the city from two directions. At the same time, this eastern parts of the Dacha area is now completely within the gray zone because the Ukrainians would have a very hard time resupplying through these roads to the southeast and southwest right next to the lake. The reason being the Russians having positions all throughout the Dacha area here to the west and to the east of that position would leave them in direct line of direct fire of the Russian positions if they want to resupply. Therefore, the Ukrainians will be forced to reconnect and withdraw back to their old positions deeper inside of Avdiivka, or to counterattack and reopen these routes going through the south. So the Russians are very close to just completely cutting it off. If the Russians gain proper control over the residential area here, then all of the Ukrainian forces to the north of those positions would be completely cut off, as the Russians could easily move here in between the road between the two sides, cutting off the Ukrainian forces here completely with a connection between the two sides. So with this, we see that the Russians will likely launch further offensive operations here to the southeast of the lake to gain control over the heights and solidify their control here to the east of Avdiivka, because now they have secured their flank by the Dacha area. We're also likely going to see further advancements by the Russians here in the northern Dacha area to try and solidify their flank against the Avdiivsky coke plant before storming it as well. We'll likely see further operations in the directions of Stepova as well to solidify their northern flank. If the Russians complete with these three operations, capturing Stepova, capturing the Dacha area to the north of Avdiivka, and capturing these smaller Dacha areas to the east of Avdiivka, then the Russians have no reason not to storm the coke plant, which would completely cut off all supply lines in and out of Avdiivka, leaving Avdiivka as a city completely encircled by the Russians. At the same time, we've also seen this small advance here to the south of Avdiivka, west of the military base, where the Russians, according to this geolocated footage, have managed to advance across these forest lines, and with this they have solidified the flank of the military base, and with this the Russians will start new operations towards the Ukrainian positions here to the north of the military base and southwest of the residential area that they are under their control in Avdiivka, and with that we'll likely see multiple operations in these two directions to try and gain control over these, which will solidify the Russian control over the residential area to the south of Avdiivka. So we're seeing that there are some significant developments taking place, and a new stage of the fighting in Avdiivka will start, as the Russians will start focusing on capturing the city itself and the most important parts beyond it to stabilize the front and stabilize their initial gains and allow them to enter the final stage, which will be storming the citadel area and the central parts of Avdiivka itself. Therefore, additional aspects to the fighting right now taking place will be the fighting here in the water treatment plant and the forest patches here to the east of Avdiivka, as the Russians would need complete control over the east of Avdiivka before they can start storming the city. And most importantly, they'll also have to take control over the low grounds here in between the southern and central parts of Avdiivka, as well as the final fortifications in the south. So all of this needs to get under Russian control if they want to start storming the city proper itself. First this part, then the low grounds. They also need to secure their flank. And with all of this under Russian control, they can start storming the Avdiivsky coke plant, getting that under their control, as well with the Stepova securing the flank. There would be no entrance or exit of Avdiivka, and the final stage of the fighting in Avdiivka will take place. This means that the Russians are still very far from capturing the city, but they're getting ever so closer, especially with such a breakthrough here to the north of Avdiivka, allowing them to gain full control over the Dacha area and possibly encircling some Ukrainian soldiers here in the field to the north. Otherwise, the Russians would already have full control over this whole area, securing them a significant advance here at the start of the month of February. At the same time, with the solidification of control over the Dacha area, if the Russians have control over this area, would allow them to start pushing and concentrating their forces in one location here to the west of the fortifications the Ukrainians have here to the eastern Dacha area, which would allow them to then take full control over this area, and they would significantly weaken the Ukrainian defenses here to the east of Avdiivka. So there is significant developments taking place, and the coming week will be very important for the Battle of Avdiivka. Will the Ukrainians send additional reinforcements to stabilize the situation, or will the Russians take advantage of this breakthrough to gain a lot more territory here in this section of the front line? We then move on to another section of the front line, and that is the Marinka direction, where the Russians have managed to gain advancements here to the northeast of Avdiivka, which is located here next to Marinka. And with these advancements, the Russians launched an armored assault against the Ukrainian positions in the area. However, they were faced off against significant fortifications of the Ukrainian army. Therefore, we see these still images that follow the geolocation that shows this Russian advance. It shows that the Ukrainians bombed these armored vehicles that ended up being damaged or abandoned by the Russians after this assault, which ended up with the Russians getting a foothold within the forest line. However, we also see that they took a bunch of armored losses based on these still images. The Ukrainians launched multiple FPV drones and other drones, dropping grenades into these armored vehicles that were abandoned or damaged, destroying them from the inside and leaving them without recover. So with this, we see that the Russians took some armored losses considering the proximity to Avdiivka, yet being at the outskirts of it, this allows the Ukrainians with their fortified positions both at the forest lines, but also at the subsequently nearby forest lines and other fortifications in the area, allowing them to attack these Russian positions that are facing off against one line after another, grinding down the armored assault and forcing the Russians to take multiple battles before they reach the main line of defense. And as such, the Ukrainians are able to send reinforcements and additional drones to support their defense, and therefore the Russians are taking multiple armored losses from this fight. This shows exactly why this active defense and defense in depth is working so well, because if the defense in depth is strong enough to withdraw and hold back the Russians for a long enough time, the Ukrainian defenders will have enough force to simply hold the Russians back, despite even if they spread out their forces a lot throughout the front line. We then move north in the direction of Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians have made yet another small advancement here by Avdiivka, where they advancement shaped like an axe, and the back of the axe hitting the Russian positions, which is exactly how the fighting is taking place. The Ukrainians are launching assaults from their own forest positions and positions within the village towards the corner here of the forest lines, and the Russians were pushed back a bit after this Ukrainian infantry assault group launched their attacks and managed to gain some advancements based on the use of FPV drones on Russian positions to weaken them and expose them, following that with some additional Ukrainian soldiers launching an assault and therefore gaining this position. So we're seeing that there's a lot of fighting in Avdiivka direction, but the Ukrainians recently seem to have gotten the upper hand with recent advancements in the area, which likely shows that Ukrainian reinforcements have arrived at the front line and the Russians have been prioritized elsewhere where we see their advancements. Where, for example, in the Sinkivka direction, the Ukrainians were forced to pull back and were pushed back from the Russian positions, and therefore we'd like to see further Russian advancements here to the northwest of Sinkivka as the forest patch fighting takes place, as the situation is continuing as a stalemate here in the Sinkivka direction with hardly any advancements, but we do see that the Russians were forcing the Ukrainians to pull back after constant artillery strikes and FPV drone strikes. And while all of this is happening in Ukraine, we see fighting throughout the front line. Their fighting within the Ukrainian government itself does not stop. There is this recently released exclusive by CNN where they talk with Zaluzhny, and Zaluzhny pretty much presents a new plan, a new strategy for the Ukrainians. That he criticizes the Ukrainian government for a lot of bureaucracy and the way that specific companies have a priority over others. Basically, he's pointing out different corruption points and different changes that he would make if it was possible for him to do so, and pretty much criticizes the Zelensky government. And this is on the wake of the rumors, whereas this other CNN article from just the day before, Zelensky said to announce dismissal of Ukraine's top commander within days as rift grows over war. So there is this insider sources of Ukraine's government saying that Zelensky plans on firing Zaluzhny, and following those rumors, Zaluzhny suddenly presents a plan for a long-term strategy change if he had political power. This clearly shows that there is a political battle over control over the political aspect of the country between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, and Zelensky is, or considering the fact that the Ukrainian election is supposed to take place prior to March 31st, Zelensky is getting desperate as there's only 2 months away, and if they hold an election, he would likely lose since the approval rating has significantly dropped, and Zaluzhny is much more popular today with about 80 to 90% approving his work in Ukraine. So Zaluzhny would win against Zelensky if they both were setting up a election campaign. And as such, Zelensky wants to remove Zaluzhny and improve his own image at the behest of Zaluzhny's image to try and prepare for this election time. Otherwise, if no election takes place, then Zaluzhny would simply become more powerful than Zelensky is, simply because of his approval rating between the population, but also his position as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, both allowing him to continue without any issues. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.